In 1982, people started dying in Chicago, all after taking Tylenol. 7 lives were lost in a matter of days, all linked to cyanide-laced capsules of one of America's most trusted over-the-counter medications. There was no warning, no motive, and even now, more than 40 years later, no arrests. This case shattered the illusion of everyday safety. It turned a staple of home medicine cabinets into a deadly weapon, and remains one of the most chilling unsolved mass murders in US history. Today we're diving into the mystery that gripped a nation, the corporate response that rewrote the playbook on crisis management, and the legacy of the Tylenol murders, a case that changed how we buy, trust, and consume products forever. It started with a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman, who lived in the suburb of Elk Grove Village. She had a sore throat, so her parents, like countless others, reached for Tylenol. At 6:30 a.m., Mary took a capsule, but by 7 a.m., she was dead. Doctors were stunned. A perfectly healthy child gone in minutes. Hours later, across town in Arlington Heights, 27-year-old postal worker Adam Janus suddenly collapsed at home. Doctors suspected a heart attack. He didn't survive. And then the horror deepened. That same evening, as relatives gathered to grieve Adam's death, his younger brothers Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa each took Tylenol from the same bottle, both of which died shortly after. Within 24 hours, 3 people from the same family were gone. What initially seemed like an unimaginable coincidence quickly turned into a homicide investigation. Over the next 2 days, 3 more victims were reported: 31-year-old Mary Reiner, 35-year-old Mary McFarland, and 27-year-old flight attendant Paula Prince. All 7 victims had one thing in common: they had taken extra-strength Tylenol capsules just before they died. The medical examiner's office moved fast. Toxicology reports revealed something shocking. Each victim had ingested a massive dose of potassium cyanide, enough to kill several people, and fast. These weren't manufacturing defects. Someone had carefully opened the capsules, added the poison, and resealed them. The killer didn't work in a factory. They bought the bottles, tampered with them, and returned them to the store shelves like nothing happened. The randomness of the victims, a child, a mother, a young professional, made it clear. This wasn't personal. It was psychological warfare. By the morning of September 30th, 1982, the story had exploded beyond Chicago. Local TV stations interrupted regular programming, newspapers rushed to print extra editions, and radio hosts warned listeners to check their medicine cabinets immediately. The headlines were stark and terrifying. Tylenol linked to mysterious deaths. Cyanide killers strike Chicago. Beware what's in your bottle. The scariest part? No one knew how many bottles were poisoned, or why they might be. Police began using loudspeakers to drive through neighborhoods, warning residents to throw away their Tylenol. And public health officials held emergency press conferences. People were instructed not just to avoid Tylenol, but to dispose of it entirely. Within hours, panic rippled nationwide. Tylenol was America's #1 painkiller, holding more than 1/3 of the US market. Nearly every household had a bottle, and now that bottle might as well have been a loaded gun. Pharmacies and grocery stores across the country yanked Tylenol from shelves, while some stores went further, pulling all capsule-based medications, afraid they also might be tampered with. In homes, parents dumped medicine cabinets into the trash, and hospitals stopped giving Tylenol to their patients. At this point, the fear had spilled over into everyday life. Halloween was only weeks away, but the atmosphere was too tense. Communities canceled trick-or-treating, causing candy sales to plummet by up to 50%. And rumors spread that other consumer products might also be poisoned, from aspirin, soft drinks, and even baby food. Johnson & Johnson, the maker of Tylenol, faced a nightmare scenario. In less than 72 hours, their most valuable brand had become toxic, both literally and in public perception. Executives made a decision that would define their company's legacy: a total nationwide recall. They pulled 31 million bottles from store shelves, every single one, regardless of the lot number, at the cost of over $100 million in 1982. That's over $333 million today. This was unprecedented. Most companies at the time would have issued a limited recall, targeting only affected batches. But Johnson & Johnson decided it wasn't worth the risk. For them, safety came first. CEO James Burke went on national television, urging Americans not to take any Tylenol until the source of the poisonings was found. They offered free replacements for returned bottles, swapping capsules for tablets, which were harder to tamper with. Their actions didn't stop the fear overnight, but they did send a message: we care more about your life than our bottom line. The moment investigators confirmed the deaths were deliberate poisonings, the response became one of the largest coordinated criminal investigations in Illinois history. Local police forces joined the FBI, the Illinois State Police, the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office, and the FDA in a massive hunt for the killer. First, they ruled out contamination at the manufacturing level. The poison bottles came from different production plants in Pennsylvania and Texas, distributed to multiple stores across the Chicago area. There was no shared lot number, no single shipment. That meant the tampering happened after the product hit the shelves. Someone had purchased the bottles at retail stores, taken them home, carefully opened the gelatin capsules, replaced the medicine with cyanide powder, and then resealed the capsules so skillfully that nothing looked out of place. They then placed the bottles back on store shelves, ready for unsuspecting customers. The method was crude in its simplicity, but devastating in its randomness. The killer wasn't targeting individuals, they were targeting the public at large. Investigators chased thousands of tips, more than 1,200 leads in the first month alone. They interviewed pharmacists, store clerks, factory workers, and anyone with the access to potassium cyanide. And then a break emerged, or so it seemed. On October 6, 1982, Johnson & Johnson received a typed letter postmarked from Chicago. The author, signing as Robert Richardson, demanded $1 million in exchange for stopping the killings. The letter laid out step by step how easy it was to lace a capsule with cyanide and warned that if the company involved the police, more people would die. The FBI chased the letter to James William Lewis, a 36-year-old accountant living in New York City at the time. Lewis had a checkered past, including charges of fraud and embezzlement. When federal agents searched Lewis's apartment, they found drafts for the extortion letter, cyanide-related documents, and diagrams showing how to open and reseal capsules. It looked damning, but there was one massive problem. Investigators couldn't place Lewis in Chicago at the time of the murders. There were no fingerprints on the bottles, no eyewitnesses who saw him in the area, and no physical evidence of tying him to the actual poisonings. In 1983, Lewis was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 20 years in prison, only serving 13. But legally, he was never charged with the murders. Over the years, other suspects emerged. A dock worker with a history of violence, a woman with a record of product tampering, but none could be conclusively linked. In 2009, the FBI reopened the case using modern forensic techniques, even exhuming some victims for retesting. They searched Lewis's home again and interviewed him for hours, but still, no charges. To this day, the FBI keeps the Tylenol murders classified as an open investigation, and James W. Lewis, who died in 2023, maintained his innocence to the end. While the FBI and local police chased leads, Johnson & Johnson faced what looked like a brand-ending catastrophe. Before the murders, Tylenol accounted for more than 17% of the company's profits. But within a week, that dominance had crumbled. Sales had dropped by over 80%, and some analysts predicted the brand might never recover. But inside company labs, engineers were already working on something that would change product safety forever. They called it the triple seal system, consisting of a glued outer box, which was impossible to open and reseal without visible damage, a plastic neckband that was heat shrunk around the cap, and finally an inner foil seal. This wasn't just a marketing move, it was a signal to the entire industry. Within months, other companies followed suit, and by 1984, the FDA made tamper-evident packaging mandatory for all over-the-counter drugs sold in the United States. When Tylenol relaunched with its new safety seals, Johnson & Johnson ran full-page newspaper ads and national TV spots explaining the changes. They even offered discounts to encourage people to give Tylenol another chance, and it worked. By the end of 1983, Tylenol had regained the #1 spot in the painkiller market. What could have been the death of the brand instead became one of the most celebrated examples of corporate crisis management in history. Johnson & Johnson hadn't just saved their product, they'd helped redefine consumer safety in America. More than 40 years later, the Tylenol murders remain one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. The killer, whoever they were, was never caught. And that's perhaps the most unsettling detail. Someone could commit an act of mass murder using a household product and vanish without a trace. The Tylenol tragedy also ushered in the Federal Anti-Tampering Act of 1983, making it a federal offense, punishable by life in prison to tamper with consumer products. This was a landmark law, born from the need to prevent another public safety disaster of this scale. And culturally, this case changed how Americans view safety and trust. Before 1982, buying medicine was almost thoughtless. You picked it up, opened it, and used it. Today we peel seals, tear plastic bands, and pop blister packs without even thinking about why those features exist. And all of it traces back to the Tylenol murders. In business schools, Johnson & Johnson's crisis response is still taught as the gold standard. Yet, the investigation remains a cold case. The FBI couldn't prove James W. Lewis as the primary suspect, and since his death in 2023, there's little chance of closure. For the families of the victims, that lack of justice is a wound that never fully heals. The children of some victims grew up never knowing the parent they lost. Siblings have spent decades wondering why. And the randomness of it all, that any bottle in any store could have been the one, leaves a lingering unease. The Tylenol murders are more than a true crime story. They're a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't the ones we see coming. They're the ones we trust without question.